Susan, in your work for the Foundation for Open Government, you advocate for transparency. But a lot of times there is a tension between privacy and people's expectation of what can be kept private and outside of prying eyes, and then this demand for access to information that the public and media organizations want. How do you work with that tension?
Well, I think the human condition is always to try to keep information private. And so when you take it to the corporate level or at the legislature, that tendency continues. But whenever we look at whether information should be kept confidential, we weigh that against the public's right to know, against privacy interests. And generally, the public's right to know is going to outweigh those individual privacy rights, except in very limited circumstances. It often arises, for example, with medical bills. HIPAA is pretty strong about individual privacy, and at that point, the legislature, this time on a national level, has done that weighing and has come down on the side of healthcare privacy.
You have a handful of bills that you're actively trying to get passed, but even more of your work is trying to push back against efforts to keep things more secret, right?
That's right. Typically, FOG will play defense, and that means that we monitor all the bills that are introduced to see if there are some confidentiality provisions, some exceptions to the Inspection of Public Records Act or the Open Meetings Act. And sometimes the provisions are maybe not intentional and not meant to keep the information away from the public, but again, that instinct is to cloak an issue in confidentiality.
Well, how important is transparency to a democracy?
Well, we believe strongly at FOG that the First Amendment, which is the first in our list of Bill of Rights, is very important. But it doesn't have meaning unless we as citizens have access to what our government is doing. And that means information, getting into meetings, being able to talk with our lawmakers.
Senator Ryu, you were one of the sponsors of the Sunshine Portal bill, which gave us the website where we can go now to look and find out how much money the state is spending on X, Y, or Z. But now you think we should have more information up there about government contracts in particular.
Well, the Sunshine Portal, was really the first step in government transparency, in an attempt to bring the public into the process where they can understand the nuances of what we do here and begin to engage in the policy-making process. The more information that's available to them, the better we're serving the public. And so the Sunshine Portal is really an expanding process. It doesn't stand alone as it is. I mean, we're always going to be trying to bring new information in as we can. So the particular bill that you're talking about that would require state contracts to be online, I mean, there's an obvious benefit to this. Taxpayer dollars are being spent on these state contracts. And the public should be able to see who's getting those contracts. They should be able to have some understanding of the content of them and even the processes that went into the selection of who would get these contracts. So it's not a gotcha kind of a thing. We just feel if that information is out there and it's available to the public, people can scrutinize that. They can ask questions. They can contact their legislators and maybe ask, questions about why things are done the way they're done. And I think that's a good thing if we can engage the public. So by getting these contracts online, the public can do that if it's a user-friendly website like the Sunshine Portal is. And we also want to be able to flag those contracts so people will know if they went to out-of-state contractors. And that may not be a bad thing, but I think people should be aware of that fact so they can ask questions. Why was that decision made? And it also creates an opportunity for local contractors to see this and make perhaps create an opportunity for them to bid on these things and keep those jobs in New Mexico. So again, we're not trying to call people out, but the more open and transparent this is, people will ask questions and hopefully we'll get better outcomes as the public begins to see how their taxpayer dollars are being spent.
One of the other issues that you are looking at this session is healthcare transparency. What kind of information do you think consumers need about healthcare now?
Well, there's been so much, discussion and debate the last several years with the Affordable Care Act, and people are paying attention to their health care and the costs and insurance issues. And people really never have been able to shop for medical services. And a person should be able to do that. If you're ready to have a hip replacement surgery, you should be able to shop that around a little bit. And there are some huge differences between hospitals as to what that would actually cost you. That information isn't available to you. And it should be. people want to be frugal with their dollars. They want to, try to get the best thing they can. So they're looking for price, but then quality. And we're trying to create a situation where we can get that information available on the Sunshine Portal, where individuals can go and be able to do some comparative shopping, as you would if you were going to buy a car or a toaster or pay for a very expensive hip replacement surgery or whatever it may be. You should be able to make a decision as a consumer about where you want to go and do that.
Of course, some of the hospitals and folks in the healthcare business say that their data is really difficult to produce. This is very complicated, and they're going to need more time in order to turn it into something that consumers can understand. Do you think that's fair?
No, I think it's very unreasonable because they have no problem right now coming up with a bill for me to pay. If I went in and had a procedure, their bill's going to show up in my mail within a couple of weeks telling me exactly what I owe them for that procedure. So I don't understand, why that is so difficult. And we ran into this before when we created the Sunshine Portal and we required various agencies and departments in the state to put this information up. We heard the same thing. This is going to be so difficult for us, so expensive. This information, in this day and age, exists. And it's just a matter of getting that information formatted in a way that could be distributed to the public. So I don't buy that argument. Sure, it's going to take, it's going to cost something to cobble it together, and it's going to take some time, but they have the resources and they have the personnel to do this. They do this all the time. They have people that are working in these IT areas. So like I say, they have no trouble telling me what I owe them for a procedure. I don't see why they couldn't aggregate that data and put out cost information that would be beneficial to the public.
Representative Dines, you spent about 40 years working as a lawyer for newspapers and other media companies. What priorities does that give you now that you're up here in the legislature?
Well, part of my campaign when I ran, and this is my first time running ever for office, was the fact of transparency in government. I've felt all along since I've been connected with FOG back when it first began and trying cases for them all over the state successfully, that's a big part of what we can do to help the people in New Mexico understand that transparency is important and that they need to know what's going on in their government.
Right now, the state legislature streams live video feeds from the committees and from the floor, but they don't save those recordings. They don't archive them. You want to see that changed. It's
something that's a public record. I think with the changes that we have now in the technological side, that it's something that we can do. And that basically I think it's good for everyone to be able to retrieve that, and I think it would be simply something that would be online.
One of the issues you have taken up is the ability of regular people to have their voices heard at public meetings. What's this all about?
Well, there's a bill right now by Representative Jim Smith to require that there be public comment time. And I think that when you're in a public meeting and you're discussing public business, that the public needs to have the ability to comment, of course, within reasonable parameters of time. It's just like up here. We have public comment in our committees, and I find that's what it's all about. We want to find out what people have to say. And I think as someone who's now part of the legislature is that I see it out there and I welcome people. They may not always agree with positions, but it's important that we have them participate.
Are there other ways that you think the state can improve transparency?
I would like to see that we do more training of some of our agencies as to how they're responding or not responding to requests for either open meetings or inspection of public records. I think that's very important. And and also I think what we can be doing up here is simply with the agencies that are out there, making sure that they understand what the presumption is in New Mexico, which is the records are open unless there is an exception. And so I think that I always told people in seminars, it's a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week vigil that you have to have because boards turn over, they change, legislators change. That's just the nature of this area. And therefore you need to be watching for and making sure everyone continues that training. That's the biggest thing. You want to create a culture where people understand that the presumption in the law, which is true in New Mexico, is for openness.
Senator Wirth, you've got a bill that would address money in politics and give people a little bit more information. What would it do?
Well, we're trying to do the one thing that the United States Supreme Court said we could do in the Citizens United case, which was a case 5 years ago that really kind of blew the doors off of the money in politics issue. And the one thing the Supreme Court said, the U.S. Supreme Court said, was we could require disclosure of donors. And this applies to those independent expenditure committees, this new kind of nebulous group where there's no limits, and corporations can play, unions can play. It's the big money in politics. What we're trying to do is figure out where's it coming from.
So we find out who's giving how much money to whom. What is it worth? What good does that information do us?
You know, it's getting tougher and tougher, and voters are getting more turned off the more complicated this gets. And we've created these new super PACs. I mean, these new kind of massive groups that are out there, and people are looking at this going, who are they? You know, where is this coming from? And so, again, really the idea here is that by at least letting folks know who's behind this, you're going to give those participants in the electoral process really what they need to participate. And so that's what we're trying to do. And let me say, this is the third or fourth year that we've had versions of this. I've been really pleased the last 2 years we've had a bill pass the Senate unanimously. Not an easy thing to do. And then it ends up over at the House, and we just haven't gotten it home. So this year it's a bipartisan bill. Representative Jim Smith is carrying the bill on the House side, and I've got it in the Senate side. And so I'm hoping that, you know, working together we can kind of try and push back the political forces on both sides, because there's no question both sides play this game. It's the reality of where we are.
You've been working on this for a while. What are some of the major challenges you face in shepherding this through to the governor's desk?
Anytime you're pushing up against the First Amendment, it's an uphill climb, and the reasons for that are good. Again, these are constitutional rights that have been elevated by the U.S. Supreme Court, and we've got to be very careful how we define when those can be limited. And so that's been the challenge. This is one of those bills, you know, as a lawyer, we do see lots of things over here, but I actually have to have my elections lawyer at my side because the cases change so rapidly and the law is evolving that this bill will go through many drafts. It hasn't been through its first committee yet, and we're already on our first substitute. So it's a big uphill challenge, but I think I'm hopeful this is the year to make it happen.